Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, and I'm so excited that you're here for this month's topic, which is all about fear. Whether it's the coronavirus or a tornado in Nashville, or maybe just the fear of your health, the fear of ending up alone, or the fear of not making enough money. You get the idea. We've got a lot of fear circling around. So this month, we're going to be talking about how to manage that fear and come back to a place of equilibrium and balance. So let's jump straight into it.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt, here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA Presidential Diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey y'all, real quick before we hop into today's episode, I am so excited to share a brand new resource with you. I have created a fear support kit just for you. It's totally free, and this kit includes a bonus audio guided meditation specifically created to help ground you and feel safe in your body. It also includes a PDF worksheet to help you rewrite your relationship to your fear, my favorite DIY essential oil recipes for combating fear, plus my number one mantra that I personally use for clearing out fearful energy. So follow the link below or head on over to maryhyatt.com/fear kit. That's FEARKIT to snag your fear support kit as my personal gift to you. Now, here is this week's episode. Hey y'all, it's Mary, and I am so excited for today's episode because my part-time co-host, Lindsley Brooks, and I happened to interview one of our very best friends, Allison Fallon. But besides being one of our BFFs, she is absolutely brilliant. Allison writes books, she helps people write books, and believes a regular practice of writing can change your life. She's the author of 12 books and counting, sought after public speaker, and coached to hundreds of authors from New York Times bestsellers to total beginners. She has spent the last decade coaching hundreds of people to gain confidence, overcome writer's block, and get their stories on paper. Even if you say, I'm not a writer, she can show you how a daily practice of writing can improve your sleep, your focus, your creativity, your productivity, and even your relationships. And today, Allie and Lindsley and I get into a deep conversation on how writing, the practice of writing and journaling, can really help you during this time of uncertainty and crisis and help you work through some anxiety and fear. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Allie. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our final episode in this month's topic of fear. Whew, it has been a month. It has been a week. It has been a day. It has been a minute.
What day is it?
That total time warp of what day is it? What time is it? And I know that maybe this is only a little moment in a day that is heavy, but hopefully we can bring you some light and some love in our episode today, because we've been talking about fear. We talked about how to kind of learn how to listen to what fear's message is for us. We've talked about tools for grounding during everything that's going on with COVID-19. And I thought for kind of a fun bonus episode that is, just lighter and fun for us at least. I've got Lindsley Brooks with me, my part-time co-host. Hey girl.
Hey.
And we are excited because we have a very special guest today. As you heard in the intro, not only is Allie, or Alice, I should say Allison. See, she's Allie to me.
She's Allie to us.
I know, right? I mean, it's like, okay, Allison Fallon, she is obviously so brilliant and is somebody that I would want to have on the podcast regardless, but it just so happens that she is Lindsley and I's bestie. And this is like the girls reunited, come together, hang out via Zoom for this podcast. So without, any further ado, let's welcome Allison to the show. Hey girl.
Hey guys, you can totally call me Allie. Everyone calls me Allie, but just Officially Allison Fallon.
I know, right? It's like, it's funny. My dad's like that because growing up, he was Mike. And then as he became more in the public, he started going known as Michael. And so when I hear people call him Michael, I'm like, what?
Who's that guy? Yeah.
Who's that?
Yeah.
Well, let's do just like a quick check-in. And I'm curious, Allie, how you doing? How you holding up over there in California?
We're holding up. Like you mentioned, it's been a crazy month, a crazy week. There have been a series of events. I mean, COVID-19, coronavirus, hit us, the reality of it hit us a little bit earlier here than it did for most people because my husband works in the events industry.
Ugh.
So he works with like a massive cultural events like South by Southwest and Coachella and all these events that are being canceled for obvious reasons. So as soon as South by Southwest canceled, I think the reality sunk in for us probably a week before it did for most people in the country, that this was a really big deal and it was going to affect at least our family economically in a pretty drastic way. And so that was over 2 weeks ago now. It feels like a lifetime ago. And it's been a surreal time. Plus I'm pregnant. I'm 20 weeks pregnant. So 21 weeks pregnant now as of Saturday. And so it's I don't know. It's so interesting to experience something like this while being pregnant because it really does take you to a different kind of primal place. And by that, I mean the primal kind of fear that you feel about protecting your family and scarcity around resources. Cause now it's not just like, as just a single woman, I'm like, I can skip a meal or, not have a place to live and I can go crash on someone's couch and it's not a big deal. But then thinking about being a mother, it just is a whole different part of your brain. And so what it's done for me is given me like boatloads of compassion for what everybody's going through right now. And even though I think all three of us, we have a lot of really positive coping skills that we've learned and the muscles that we've practiced over time that are so helpful to deal with fear. And even with all of those skills, this is still a really tough time. So I don't know. I say all that to say both a check-in of where I'm at. The truth is it's been hard. It's been a roller coaster. I have days where I'm like, this is all going to be fine and everything's going to work out and our baby's going to have everything she needs. And then other days where I'm like, we're going to be homeless and living under a bridge.
Yep.
I shouldn't say days. There are moments where you slip into days. And so anyway, anything that you're feeling right now, pretty much normal.
Right. And I my sister said the other day to me, she said, nobody knows how to go through this. Like we have these tools and we have these things that we can kind of pull from other times in our life that can, that can be helpful during this time, but none of us have any reference point for this kind of experience. Like we kind of have seen war or tragedy or things like that on the news, but to be in the midst of something this huge, it's like, how are we supposed to know how to go through that? And I think I love what you said of just like, let's have some serious grace and compassion because this is just foreign and we're trying to navigate it as best we can. And so Lindsley, I'm curious, how are you doing? Let's have a quick little check-in with you.
I know. Well, today I'm doing good. It's kind of like take it moment by moment. Being a single woman and living by myself and having just me, myself, and my thoughts has been quite an adventure. But like you guys are saying, I've given so much gratitude for the last couple of years of my own journey of dealing with any kind of anxiety attacks or trauma issues or PTSD, things that have come up, throughout the last couple of years that have helped me cultivate my resources and my tools and my emotional and spiritual tool belt, so to speak. And I'm so grateful that I'm able to pull from a lot of those. And like we've been saying too, letting myself have those moments to have like no energy to pull the tools out and have moments where I do have an absolute meltdown and I just greet myself with like parenting myself, like being a really good parent to my emotional inner child who is sometimes scared shitless,
Yeah.
And isn't it interesting too, like all the old things that like we used to say were our problems, how they just kind of pale in comparison to what's going on now.
Right.
Right.
Totally.
Like all my little dramas and all the things that I used to like get swept up in with my self-pity or feeling like woe is me. And all of a sudden it's like, no, this is a whole other league of pulling. So anyways, I think
it's so good. It's like, this is like calling forth the expert in us to show up. I mean, this is like the real round. I mean, we're in it. And I think that's why more than ever, these tools are so valuable and so necessary. I was teaching a guided meditation kind of workshop for a company last week, and working through teaching people how to meditate and all of that. And I said that this is going to feel like a luxury, but it's actually a necessity. And I feel like that is so true with writing. And that is why I wanted to bring in Allie today to give us a tool that almost seems like, to me at least, almost like who's got the energy to do it? But the reality is, it's like, this is an essential necessity tool to process the magnitude of what we're experiencing and feeling. And so, Allie, I'd love to hear from you. Kind of like, let's just pause the fact that we're in crisis. We'll get to how this is relevant for crisis, but just in general, you teach the benefits of writing and the power of journaling just in everyday life. And so can you kind of go through some of that for us and share with us, like, what are some of those benefits, regardless of what you're experiencing or what the season is? Why do you do this work?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background to explain how I even got here. But I have always been drawn to writing. I don't think everybody feels that way, but from the time I was really young, it was something that I did to process what was going on in my life, and it felt pretty cathartic. And I grew up in a world where there were a lot of things I felt that I couldn't say that I wanted to say. And so my writing was a place where I could say it to myself. So journaling was a coping mechanism that got me through depression and anxiety and all kinds of mental health challenges through high school and college and beyond college, and breakup after whatever, like the whole drama of our lives. Anyway, I leveraged that interest and skill into writing my own book, and then working with other authors who were working on books. I would help them. I built a curriculum that would teach authors how to outline their books. And I started working with tons of authors everywhere from total beginners, people who had never done this before, all the way to authors who had been really successful in their careers. And I noticed a consistency among anybody who was working on a writing project. And the consistency was that as they wrote through whatever subject they were putting on the pages of their book, they would experience a sort of connected, or sometimes weirdly disconnected, positive benefit in their emotional, spiritual, mental life. So I just started noticing this anecdotally, and I also felt it myself, but I kind of thought, maybe I'm just biased because this is a practice that I tend to love and be drawn to. And I'm working with all these people who are doing writing. So maybe I'm just kind of making this up or drawing a conclusion that isn't really there. And then I stumbled across massive bodies of research that have been around for a long time. And I don't know why they're not more widely known about the dramatic positive benefits that writing, a regular practice of writing, can bring into our lives. Things you would never expect. So some things you'd expect, you're like, it makes sense that if I sit down and write my thoughts, that it's going to help me with maybe my mental health or my emotional health, or it's going to make me feel a little more centered or grounded. You might have even had an experience like that as you're journaling, that you journal about something and then you kind of feel a little better about it. But the kind of benefits that I was most shocked by were things like people who write every day, people who are in a regular practice of writing, which consists of 20 minutes a day for 4 days in a row, have stronger immune systems than those who don't. Wow. So they visit the doctor 50% less often for upper respiratory infections and flu.
Hello.
Which I know. It's funny because this is the statistic I always lead with when I'm speaking in front of groups of people, because I think the reason I lead with it is I say, imagine if writing could have that kind of impact on your cellular biology, imagine the impact it's having on every other area of your life. But I think right now in the season we're living in, it's a particularly relevant statistic, considering we're all trying to do absolutely everything we can to strengthen our immune systems. And I think if you're willing to take a look at this from a spiritual perspective, there's also for your immune system is your body's first line of defense. So what an incredible metaphor for what we're doing spiritually, emotionally, mentally in the world, like defending ourselves against negativity and shame and all the fear messages that are always coming at us. What if writing could be your way of bolstering your line of defense? So there are 1,000 other statistics I could talk about. Writing improves your sleep. People who write regularly are more likely to report being happy in their romantic relationships. Writing, it speeds up the amount of time it takes someone to heal from a physical wound, which is connected probably to immune system. But across the spectrum, from personal life to professional life to financial life to mental and emotional health, writing has a dramatic impact on each of those things.
That is so fascinating because, I am the same as you. I grew up doing my journaling and it was like my best friend. It's like, and I even tried to learn little like code so I could write to myself. So if anybody found it, that nobody would see it. But I am curious because with all the statistics and stuff, it is interesting why do you think people are not more into this? Because I would imagine that having that expression and having that safe place to kind of get all your thoughts and your emotions out on paper, what do you think is some of the resistance to why more people don't know?
Hey y'all, I just wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to remind you to subscribe to this podcast. I know that emails get lost in your spam folder, so subscribing means my episodes come right to your phone. So go ahead, hit that quick little subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of the Living Fully Alive episodes. Plus, in addition to subscribing to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. I don't know if you know this, but I have been releasing guided meditations every Monday over on YouTube, and you're not going to hear them here. So if you've been wanting to start an easy meditation practice, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on my short 15-minute guided meditations. All right, now back to this week's episode.
It's the same resistance we have to anything that's really good for us, right? Like when you're feeling bad about yourself, what's the first thing you do? You stop taking care of yourself. You stop working out. You stare at your phone all day. It's the path of least resistance, even though you kind of know deep inside that this is not going to help you. But what it does is it gives you a hit of feeling good right this second at the expense of, what the outcome that you ultimately want. So when I talk to people about writing, there are usually one of two responses. One response is people like us, just like you said, Lindsley, are really drawn to the practice. They're like, I actually feel a tug, a sort of pull to the page, and I really want to write. But I stop myself because I feel like I'm not really one of the real writers. There are other people out there who are really good at that. I'm not good at it. And so because they don't want to include themselves in what they think is this kind of elite club, they disqualify themselves from it before they even start. And then there's a whole second group of people who are like, that sounds miserable to me. The thought of sitting down to write out my thoughts, like that, nothing sounds worse, and with those group of people, one of the things that I ask them to do is talk to me about their earliest experience as it relates to writing, because you'd be shocked at the similarities between the first group and the second group is that somehow in our culture, we've come up with this idea that writing is this elite thing that only certain people get to do and only people who are really gifted or talented or trained, and everybody else has to be shut out of the club. And when you talk to the people who resist writing and hate writing and think it sounds miserable, you oftentimes find a very early experience in their life with writing where they were shamed for their writing skills, or they were ridiculed, or they were laughed at, or they were made fun of, or they worked really hard on a paper and they turned it in and a teacher gave them a D, or something like that, that connects the dots for us of why they would hate and resist writing so much. But at the end of the day, we're all writers. There's no way in the modern world, there's no way to survive and thrive without writing composing and sending messages to people, right? Like we send text messages every day, we post on Instagram, we send emails. And if we think through all the words that we write down in a day and imagine how we could use these words to leverage some positive change and positivity in our life, why wouldn't we take advantage of the fact that we're already using this tool?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we might as well use it to our advantage.
Well, and I think just the writing process in general, again, if you've kind of count yourself out that you're not a good writer, this isn't something you do professionally, it can feel overwhelming. I think sometimes, like, what do you even write? Like, how do I even begin? And I think that I know for me, and I can rewind, and I don't know if you guys felt this way, because so all of us, the reason I think we became friends is because we were sort of walking through divorce at the same time together. And I can remember towards the end of my divorce, it was like I definitely had a relationship with writing where I would journal every single day. But as that got closer to my divorce, and I didn't feel safe. I really didn't feel a sense of privacy. And I felt like if I write something, I'm going to be totally exposed. So there was a lot of fear of exposure for me with writing. And I got out of the habit of writing, even though I knew it was cathartic, even though I loved doing it, there was this fear. So I think there's a couple elements here as an adult. It's like combined with what you were taught as you were younger and some of that messaging you received early on, as an adult, there can be this sense of it's not safe to write because what if somebody finds my innermost thoughts? I think there is also this idea that it has to be something specific. Like, I don't know, how do I write when I'm not writing for a school paper or something like that? The idea that writing could be a form of therapy or a form of even play is kind of foreign, I think. And then how do I write when it's not for achievement? When it's not geared towards accomplishing something and turning something in, or, writing an actual book. So how do you instruct beginners who aren't maybe in a normal writing practice as adults to kind of have that entry level of like where to even begin when they start?
So that's a great question. The place to begin, if you're interested in cultivating a regular practice of writing in your life, is to start by making space. And I talk about making space in your physical space, making space on your calendar, and then making mental space. So 3 different kinds of space that we have to make in our life. And actually, to me, this is one of the great gifts of the writing life, is that writing, like meditation or like yoga or like any of these practices that we engage in that are really positive for us, require us to sort of carve out a little bit of space that's just ours, where we get to be perfectly ourselves and we don't have to perform for anyone and nothing is expected of us, and we get just to show up and see ourselves for how we really are. Writing does this exact same thing. And before you ever even put a single word on the page, making space starts to do this for you. So the first thing I walk writers through is creating a space in their home that feels safe and private and secure and stable for them. And the truth is, sometimes when I'm walking through this with a client, there are times when we don't have a space in our home that feels like this for us. And Lindsley, I feel like you'll get a kick out of this because you work with people to help create these kind of spaces in their home. And actually, in my book, when I talk about this, I tell the story of you coming over to my house that day and being like, your space feels kind of cold and sterile. Anyway, the whole point being that what an insight. If we start in the first step of this process and we realize, I don't have a space, and you kind of touched on this, Mary, like I don't have a space in my life that feels private enough where I could write words and they'd be safe. Like what an insight. So before we even put a word on the page, already the practice that we're cultivating in our life of writing is creating change, because we're creating this awareness that I don't have anywhere in my life where I feel like I can write down words and they'll be private. So even just the process of creating that space is life-changing, and then we move on to creating space in our calendar. And this is super practical. And the one thing I warn people about when I teach about this is you run the risk of hearing it and thinking, well, that's so simple, that you never actually do it. And it is really simple. It's so simple you could do it right now while you're listening to this podcast if you wanted to. But don't let the simplicity of it make you like sort of pass it by mentally. But the simple task is just literally going into whatever system you use to keep track of your schedule and your calendar and scheduling in some time for writing. And it doesn't have to be hours. It doesn't have to be an hour. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 10 minutes. It could be 20 minutes. In fact, I would recommend, if you're not used to a regular practice of writing, starting really small, because it would be like if you were really out of shape and working out wasn't a thing in your life, and I took you to the gym and threw you on a treadmill for 40 minutes, the experience would be so miserable, you would never want to go back. But if I put you on a treadmill for 3 minutes, then you're like, well, that wasn't so bad. I'll come back tomorrow. And maybe tomorrow you can do 5, and then the day after you can do 10 and whatever. We can work up to it over time, but don't feel like you haven't really done it. If you haven't written for 40 minutes, you could write for 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever feels good to you. And then making mental space is really just about, the mental space happens before you ever record a word on the page. But mental space is just the same thing we do with meditation. This is why I love what you do so much, Mary. The process of making mental space is about noticing the thoughts as they come up and creating some focus for your brain to focus on one thing at a time. We don't ever do this in our lives. In the modern world, we focus on 10,000 things at one time. So to have a project where you've got some focused attention in one direction, like writing, it's doing the same thing in your brain that meditation does in your brain. It's doing the same thing in your brain that yoga does in your brain. It's forcing your brain to focus on one thing at a time. And truthfully, with writing, sometimes that's a negative thought. So, and this is like, it sounds kind of counterintuitive to like the positive thinking, how powerful positive thinking can be. Sometimes it's a negative thought. But what's really important for our brain is to play that negative thought all the way out until the end so that you can close the loop. Because once the loop is closed, you don't have to keep wondering about it again and again and again. Like sometimes a practice I'll do for myself when I'm really freaking out about something that might happen, some sort of worst case scenario, I'll sit down and I'll write out the worst case scenario to the very end. Because then rather than the end, ethereal worst case scenario that I'm not really imagining any specific details, but I'm just so scared that it might happen. Now I have the actual worst case scenario written out and I can kind of settle with it and make peace with it. And I'm like, okay, if the worst case scenario is I have to move out of my house and move into someone's basement, I will live. So will my baby. So will my husband. We're all going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if that makes sense, but making space in your physical environment, making space in your calendar, and then making space in your brain.
I love what you're saying about just the mere act of setting an intention to get into this space physically, mentally, emotionally, that even just doing that is like changing the course of even opening yourself up to being able to receive. Because for me, when I'm doing the journaling exercise, it's an intention to access a part of my subconscious or a part of my emotional self that I may not be present to. It may be in my blind spot. And so what I'd love for you to even kind of expand on is just like, because I have 2 intentions usually when I am journaling. I'll either have some sort of focus where I want to do like a gratitude entry, right? Or sometimes I'll do, very much the artist way type of doing it, which is more of like writing stream of consciousness and just letting whatever wants to come. But I've noticed when I do that, looking over through the years of my journal entries, that sometimes it's the same entry over and over and over again, which is usually me bitching and complaining about something. And then I'm all indulging my, self, and it looks like nothing in my life has changed is what it feels like. So will you say a little more about when you do set an intention and you start writing, do you have a focus that you teach people, or is it kind of just stream of consciousness?
So we can do it both ways, but the way that I differ I've learned so much from Julia Cameron and the Artist Way, and her program is one that I will promote until the day that I die. I think that woman is a genius, and I'm really, really grateful for the work that she's done. She talks about writing stream of consciousness and just doing kind of a brain dump in the morning of like whatever's happening in your brain. She says to write for 40 minutes. And I've had a similar experience to you, Lindsley. When I do that consistently, I find that I do a lot of complaining and a lot of bitching and moaning. And actually, she would say, this is the point. is that you're dumping all the negativity out of your brain and you're actually burning those pages and you're never looking back at them ever again. So that she said, but after 40 minutes, you get tired of hearing yourself bitch and moan. And then you can move on to something better. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And also another practice that I teach writers I work with is if you're going to go back and read what you've written, a really powerful tool can be to start to notice the consistencies. Because think of everything that we know about cognitive behavioral therapy and I know you teach a lot of this, you both teach a lot of this too. So this is probably not brand new for your listeners, but the idea that thoughts lead to feelings, which lead to actions, which lead to results. Yep. So our thoughts are driving our life, and whether we realize it or not, and wherever we want to enter into the process, sometimes we enter in through the results. Like if you come to a therapist that they ask you like, what brought you here? What they're trying to get at is what are the results in your life that brought you here? And so that they can trace all the way back to subconscious thoughts that are driving your behavior. And when you think about that and you think about a process like writing, where writing gives us this freedom to honestly express what's happening in our hearts and in our brains, it's an excellent way to start to get at the subconscious thoughts that are driving our behavior. In fact, the act of writing, people are much more likely to tell the truth with pen and paper than they are when they're speaking out loud. And that data is talking about an actual pen and an actual piece of paper. And I can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was just going to ask about that because I was thinking, does it make a difference for people who are writing by hand in a journal, or if they type it, like on a daily journal and on their computers? I'd be curious. I kind of feel like I know what you're going to say, but I'd love for you to just explain quickly the benefit of whichever one you prefer.
Both are really helpful, but writing with pen and paper is a little bit more helpful. So if you enjoy writing with a journal, an actual physical journal and a pen, then I would say do it that way. If that's going to be like, I don't know what the word is, like if it's going to keep you from doing it, then don't do it. Just write on your computer or your device or whatever you have in your hand. And sometimes, I get the itch to write something down and all I have with me is a cocktail napkin and a pen. So write it there. That's fine. Whatever you have available to you, and if that's your phone, the note section on your phone, then write in the note section on your phone. The idea is like to cultivate a readiness to record when things come to your awareness. And I guess going back to what you were asking, Lindsley, like this is the value of following those negative trails is, like I worked with a writer who had this experience where there was this person in her life who had been really influential for her, but she also had a very tense relationship with this person. And she was like, if I write his name down one more time, I am going to poke my own eyeballs out. I've had that experience too, where you're writing about like an ex or something and you're just like, why am I still writing about this person? I don't even care. Move on. But you can start to notice the consistencies in your writing where you'll hear people say out loud, I'm so over him. I've totally moved on. And yet his name is showing up and they're writing over and over and over again. You haven't totally moved on and you're not totally over him. That's the truth. And when we start to see the truth of ourselves on the page, we can actually cultivate some awareness around it. And that awareness is what releases us from that loop.
That's just so powerful to think about, having some freedom from that constant self-rumination or ruminating over certain things. And I think about what's happening culturally right now with the coronavirus and the emotions that seem to be coming up more than kind of anything else are fear and anxiety. And I love that you brought up the idea of sort of playing out the worst case scenario and being able to close that loop, because I think for all of us in a time of uncertainty, whether it's the death of a loved one, whether it's we're diagnosed with an illness, whether it's divorce, there are these moments in our lives where we think, I don't know what's going to come next. And our brain goes to worst case scenario. And like you said, if we're not taking the time to sort of slow down and flesh that out, it just takes a hold of us. And it's sort of this very gray, not super clear kind of vision that has hijacked our emotional self. And so thinking about using this asset, this tool, this way of processing what we're experiencing, using that writing skill for fear specifically, for anxiety specifically. I know that this is something that you have created some very specific prompts around. And I'm just curious, like maybe offering the people listening some ways to process through what's happening in real time right now, fear and anxiety, I think would be really helpful, because I think when we're in a state of survival, sometimes we don't have the frontal cortex part of our brain online to where we can make decisions of even what to write. It's like asking too much because we're in survival to even think through, what do I want to write about today? So maybe we can just give some like real practical, like, here's where to start when you're dealing with fear or anxiety that is showing up right now.
Totally. So I'm going to preface this by saying, back when I was going through a divorce, I was kind of in the worst of it. I was losing a lot of things that I had considered part of my stability and my ecosystem at the time. And I was totally freaking out. I didn't have the tools back then either that I have now. So I was like in full meltdown mode. And thankfully I was very, very well supported and therapists and stuff. But I was meeting with a therapist and I was completely freaking out. And she said to me, if you need to freak out, that's fine. You just let yourself freak out. But she said, make sure that you're looking at this problem from more than one direction. So she gave me the example or the analogy of a beach ball. Like if you know how a beach ball is like a bunch of different colors. If you're looking at the beach ball from one direction, all you'll see is yellow. But if you rotate it to the right just a little bit, you'll see red. And then if you rotate it more, you'll see white. And if you rotate it more, you'll see blue or whatever. So the idea being that things have a 360-degree view. And if we're not walking all the way around a thing and looking at it from every angle, we're only seeing part of the picture. So yes, whatever we're walking through right now is scary. That's true. It's real. There's no way to get around that. But it's only the yellow. It's only one part of the picture. So let's make sure as we're writing that we're not only writing out worst case scenario, but we're also writing out best case scenario. What could be, and you said this to me on the phone, Mary, when I was telling you about how we were moving our book in a day program virtual and how it wasn't going to be quite as good or quite the same, but we were going to make it work. And I was trying to be really positive and you were like, wait a second, how could it be actually better? Have you thought about that? We can help each other even just to walk around to the other side of the beach ball and go like, hey, it's blue over here. And this is a tiny bit of a tangent, but this is the other benefit of writing and sharing our stories with others is where I'm sitting in Pasadena, California, things look one way. And where you're sitting in Nashville, Tennessee, they look completely different. Yeah. If I'm not hearing from you, I'm only seeing one part of the puzzle. We have to be able to hear from each other to see the whole puzzle. So all of that to say, that's all a preface to talk about a writing prompt that you can use during this time. And I actually think this writing prompt is great to use anytime. I call this prompt the infinity prompt because you can use it over and over and over again. You'll never run out of content or material to write about. And it's based on two things. It's based on the research about what type of writing helps us cultivate this change I'm talking about. And it's also really connected to the cognitive behavioral model I was talking about earlier, how our thoughts and feelings drive our behavior. So the prompt works like this. You choose a situation from your life that feels charged. So like right now, it's for most of us, if you're listening to this in present tense, you might not just say like, well, COVID-19 feels charged. Of course it does. But what about it feels charged? Like, is it that you lost your job? Is it that your ailing grandmother is in a high-risk population? Is it that you're worried for your kids who are out of school for the rest of the year? What's the part of the situation that feels the most charged for you? And then you walk through 3 steps. And the first step is just to write out the facts of the situation. So a couple things about writing out the facts of the situation. To write out the facts of a situation, imagine that you're a reporter on the scene of a crime or something. And your job is to report only what's provable and true. So it's not a fact to say, 2 million people are going to die, or to make predictions about the future. Those are not facts. Those are predictions about the future. Listing the facts means listing what's actually going on, listing the who, what, where, and when. Another way to think about this is to imagine that you're sitting in a movie theater and you're watching the movie unfold on the screen, and you can just describe what you see happening. So describe who's there, describe what they're doing, describe what the setting looks like, describe who's coming and going, but listing out only the facts of the situation. You can actually do this like in a bullet point list. You don't have to worry about getting the grammar perfect or writing it out perfectly. But the idea of writing the facts first helps you start to divide what's actually true right this minute from what you fear, what you worry about, what you are panicking about, what you're hopeful about, what you wonder might happen, all of those things. It's going to help you start to separate. Then the second step in the situation is to begin to write your thoughts about the situation. And to get people to think about their thoughts about the situation, 2 kind of entry points into this. Number 1 is the story I'm telling myself is that we're all going to die. I don't know.
Right.
The story I'm telling myself is my daughter's not going to have everything she needs. The story I'm telling myself is we're going to have to move out of our house. The story I'm telling myself is whatever.
It's not safe to go outside.
Yeah. I'm going to be alone forever.
Right.
Yes, totally. The other way to get into thoughts is this makes me think of. So as you think about the facts of the situation, the fact of the situation is, you know, we're under the Safer at Home Act now in California, and I think you are too in Nashville.
Yeah,
right?
we're just starting today.
Yep.
First day 1. So that's
Day
the
1.
fact of the situation. This makes me think about, maybe it makes you think about how much freedom we're used to having and how much freedom we don't have now, whatever it is. And as you start to list out these thoughts, you'll realize that there's a separation between what's actually true about the situation and what you're making up about it. And it's not, I don't have you list out the thoughts so that you can start to feel really bad about yourself for making up stories about the situation. This is what our brain does. It makes up stories about a situation. But what you start to see is that the stories you're making up about the situation are your leverage to create change. So I can make up a story that 2 million people are going to die and everything's going to, we're all going to, you know, it's all going to hell in a handbasket and we're never going to come out of this. Or I can also, using the same part of my brain, make up a story about a situation that this is going to create necessary adjustments in our culture that are going to change the way that we live forever and are going to make us feel more connected and grateful than we've ever felt before.
Yeah.
Both are just 2 different sides of the beach ball. And then the third thing that you can journal is, what are your feelings about the situation? And the great thing about journaling feelings is thoughts usually are somewhat rational. They're our brain's way of making up a story about what's happening. Feelings are often totally irrational. So like I was telling my husband this morning, like I feel so much tightness in my chest. That's a feeling. And, you know, he was asking me like, well, can you tell me more about what the fear is really about? And I'm like, it's not really logical. We're fine. We, you know, like here we are, we're sitting in our perfectly peaceful house with a full fridge of food and money in the bank account. And we're, you know, but it doesn't matter whether it's logical or not. The truth is I feel a tightness in my chest. And as you journal through these feelings, just know that you might not fully understand why those sensations are there yet, but they are there for a reason. They're talking to you, they're speaking to you, they're telling you something really valuable and really important, even if they're not logical. You don't have to make sense of them right now.
Yeah.
And as you journal through these 3 things, your brain is going to want to conflate the 3. That's one problem people run into, where facts seem like feelings and feelings seem like facts. So I've already given a few examples of that. But the other thing that your brain is going to want to do is try to make connections between them. And you don't necessarily have to. Again, feelings are not logical. Thoughts are usually more logical and facts are indisputable. The indisputable and unchangeable details of the situation.
Yeah.
But it's helpful for your brain to start to separate them and go like, okay, this is the story I'm making up about what's going on. Who knows what will happen? And this is a feeling that I'm feeling, and I can have compassion for myself that I'm feeling that, even though I don't understand why. So yeah, infinity prompt is a situation that's charged, facts about the situation, thoughts about the situation, feelings about the situation.
I think this is so powerful because I think that right now we're feeling so much, we're experiencing so much so quickly as information is getting to us. And honestly, this is really true for any time in our life where things are challenging, things are difficult. We are just like going through the thoughts and the feelings at rapid pace, and we're not pausing to bring a sense of mindfulness to it. And that is where our power lies. Like I think about, okay, well, why do this? To me, it's like, this is our power. It allows us to create a pause and space to cultivate new awareness, to go, how do I want to respond now? Like knowing what's true versus knowing what those stories are that I'm making up, or what the sentences are in my head, how I might be feeling something that is irrational potentially, or makes maybe a lot of sense given what we've gone through in our life, sort of like rehearsing old historical emotions, which is very common in trauma. It's that trauma link that happens, and we're going, oh, I've felt this fear before. And when I felt this fear before, I respond in XYZ way. Like it's our way of having our trauma response. And this puts the pause in it. I think that's the gift of what I'm seeing as you're talking. I'm like, oh, this is that moment where we cultivate almost like this 10,000 foot view perspective, where we go above ourselves, so we're not in it anymore, and we can gain that perspective. We can gain a higher viewpoint, and go, okay, this is why I'm responding this way. It feels familiar. This is triggering me. This is showing up. This is coming up. And it gives us also, I think, an opportunity to be honest, because I think what's really, we haven't talked about this, but I think what is hard maybe about this time is that sometimes we don't have people in our lives to communicate our fears with, and to be vulnerable with, and to really share like what is below the surface. And we're kind of, I think, taught to act like we've got it all together and seemingly, be really, really strong. And I think that's one of the invitations of this time actually, is sort of this like collective unfolding of like, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. It is okay to be afraid. And so have you seen that with your clients, like this sort of like invitation to get radically honest about what they're actually feeling when they haven't maybe had a space to share that before, like with other people?
Absolutely. In fact, one piece of feedback I'll hear from clients all the time is, as they write something on the page, they tell me, I didn't even realize that I thought that. To the point where so many spaces and places in our life require us to act or perform in a certain way that sometimes we don't even realize we're not being truthful with ourselves. We don't even have a space inside of ourselves where we feel like there's room for us to not have it all together and to not be super positive all the time and optimistic about everything. And I think writing, one of the things that's really special about writing is it starts to cultivate that kind of inner space for it to just be okay to include everything that is true. So yeah, like if you think through the spaces and places in your life, the roles that you play as a person, when in your faith community, you feel like you kind of can't fully honestly express yourself, because if you express doubts, then what's going to come back to you is criticism or concern about the state of your faith or whatever. Maybe as a parent, you feel like you have to sort of hold it together for your kids, and you've got to make sure that they know everything's going to be okay, and you have to be the strong one. Maybe even in your romantic relationship, you feel like you're kind of your partner maybe doesn't have the capacity to let you have a meltdown without them melting down themselves. And so you feel like, okay, I have to like put on my big girl pants and be real strong and hold it together for everyone in my life. And what about the moments when, like you said, Lindsley, your inner child is totally freaking out and throwing a temper tantrum? Those parts do live inside of us, no matter how strong you are. And do you have a space or a place in your life where you can allow for that to just be true for a minute? One of the things I think is interesting, and writing helps us with this, is we sometimes think that when we feel a negative emotion, we understand that negative emotions and negative thoughts drive us down a pathway that we don't want to walk down. So when we start to feel a negative emotion, we think like, oh no, I've got to shut that out as quickly as possible. I got to turn that faucet off. And what ends up happening is those negative thoughts and feelings get stuck in our bodies, and they just come out weird and sideways down the road. So what I found is that if I have a negative emotion, or what I would consider a negative emotion, come up, if I'm starting to feel fear or I'm starting to feel shame, if I just let the wave come, it passes. And it actually passes fairly quickly. I've had a few moments in the last 2 weeks where, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I've had a meltdown, or what I would consider a meltdown, like the point where all of your coping mechanisms and strategies and positive thoughts and tools and whatever, like, aren't cutting the mustard anymore. And you're just like, this will never work out. We're doomed. And it passes in like 30 minutes or 10 minutes sometimes, or maybe an hour. But if you let yourself feel what you're feeling, it passes through your body. It actually transforms you as it moves through, and then it moves out of you and moves on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I've even noticed too that if I'm starting to feel myself get really anxious, like in just, moving around the house or talking, and I'm even feeling all this kind of restlessness energy, it's usually something that's wanting to come to the surface that wants to purge out. And the only way I know how to get it out is, for me specifically, is to journal. And it's something about, like you were saying, Mary, you get some altitude on what's even going on with you because you're so in your blind spot, you can't even see what's happening. And then you're able to kind of release it. And then something about just the awareness alone creates enough space from it that it clears right through you. It's like just knowing what's going on, you're able to name it and release it.
It's so powerful.
So
it's so powerful.
Love the process. Journaling is a lifeline. It's like for anybody
really
that
is.
doesn't know, please do it.
Well, and I just think about too, like, it's free. This is a free resource, which is wonderful to have available in your set of tools, because there's a lot of tools that we pay for that are, God, so amazing.
Yes.
This is one of those tools that literally anybody can do in any socioeconomic place in your life. You can do this, which I think is really beautiful. Children can do it. Adults can do it. Elderly people can do it. This is something that really doesn't have any barriers in that regard. But I'm curious just to kind of take all of this and wrap it up. Allie, like, thinking about this time in particular, is there anything that you would suggest for listeners to just sort of give themselves permission to do, like something that might feel as they embark on this new journey, like to make it less intimidating or less intense? Is there anything that you would just say, I don't know, even like a word of encouragement, since you've seen so many people go through this process, any sort of like word of wisdom from Allie?
Yeah, I mean, the word of wisdom or encouragement is that you will inevitably, as you sit down to begin writing, no matter who you are, you'll start to feel the imposter syndrome is the word that we all use to talk about this, but it's the feelings of like, oh my God, I am so bad at this. I'm the worst writer ever. I don't even have anything to say. What would I write? This is going to be a giant waste of time. Other people are doing this and they're way better at it than me. Why would I even try? So all these like voices that come up when you sit down to do it. And what I want you to know and remember, and what I'll remind you, is that every writer I've ever worked with has said those things and thought those thoughts and felt those feelings when they sit down to write. Even writers who have sold millions of copies of their books, even writers who make a full-time living from their writing, even writers whose books have been turned into major motion pictures, these authors and writers all feel the same feeling when they sit down to the page. So if you can depersonalize it and just know this is resistance, this is the natural resistance that comes when I try to cultivate awareness and try to do this inner work. And I don't have to know ahead of time or decide what will come from my writing before I sit down to do it. I can just find a way to enjoy the process and to use this to feel a little more settled inside, a little more grounded, like I have a little bit of a better understanding of myself, and to start to curate the voice of wisdom, which is what comes through our writing. Like I always tell people, don't fire your therapist, keep going to your therapist. But what if you could make your therapist's voice inside of your head? And you can do that through the process of writing, because you start to sort of do for yourself what your therapist does for you, where you're like, that's interesting that you say that, because yesterday you told me whatever it was. So you start to kind of do for yourself what your therapist does for you. And again, don't fire your therapist if you've got a great therapist, but you can expedite the process. You can speed it up, and you can start to internalize some of those really positive, helpful outer voices, so that you don't always have to rely on something outside of you to get the help and support that you need. Now it's like, it's inside, it's in me, and I can come back to myself at any time that I want or need. It's the most beautiful gift that you can give yourself. We've talked about this a little bit because we all went through this really hard season together, but there's something about going through a season like that and coming out on the other side stronger, where you go like, I feel kind of invincible in the sense that like, I know that I'm strong and I can go through anything.
Yeah.
That feeling is priceless. Take everything else away from me, because as long as I have that feeling, I have everything I need.
Yeah, it cultivates resilience on so many different levels. And I just, as you were talking, I just think like changing that verbiage of like, well, as a writer, it's like remembering, and I know you say this, Allie, all the time, like we are all writers. Like whether you're doing this and getting paid for it or not, if all you're doing is journaling, you are a writer. Like this is an identity that we collectively share. And so to kind of begin to see yourself as somebody like that is just really powerful. So I want to make sure that people know where to find you and how to stay connected with you. So where is the best place for everybody to get more Allie?
If you want free writing prompts, we send out a free writing prompt every single Monday morning with instructions for how to use it. You can get those at findyourvoice.com/prompt. And you can find me if you want on Instagram at Allison Fallon.
Awesome. So findyourvoice.com. Is it /prompts?
/ yes.
Perfect. Okay. So we're going to have that linked up for you on the show notes. So you'll get to see this below this episode and you can click on all that, and definitely follow Allie on Instagram because she often will post pictures of the cutest puppy you've ever seen and her baby bump. So who doesn't need more baby bumps and puppies right now? No, but also just amazing writing prompts as well. You always have just the greatest content. So Allie,
Thanks.
Oh girl, thank you for sharing your wisdom, for being with us. And
thanks
Lindsley,
for having me.
As always.
I love you guys.
Thanks for driving the ship together.
All
right. Love y'all. We'll see you guys next week. Bye. Hey y'all, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you got some amazing nuggets to take home and start implementing into your life. And if you're looking for the show notes and links, head on over to maryhyatt.com/show. And if you loved it, why not bring your girlfriends along this journey of becoming fully alive with you? Just give a quick share of this episode to your social channels and enjoy those debriefing convos with your besties. Thanks again, and I can't wait to connect with you next week.